I'll try my best. Melinda apologized afterwards of breaking the time. I apologize beforehand because I'm going to talk about a book that's 66, you said. So it's like 34 plus 22 is like 60 years old. And there's still discussions about it. People still haven't reached like a consensus about it, what this book is actually about. So I decided to build my presentation like this. I'm going to talk a little bit about Susan Sontag and against interpretation. Then I'll try to connect that with against storytelling. It's not that I hate storytelling, Andy. It's just that I wasn't clever enough to come up with one for my restaurant, so I just didn't put it. So I've been writing. Andy knows I've been walking around with this book under my arm for 2 years. Look like a preacher of the Bible, because it has become my subject of study. Because Susan Sontag is an amazing woman, and I was going to talk about her, but because of short time issues, Google yourselves about her. You're gonna, if you're interested after the speech, you just Google and go and research her. So her biography speaks for herself, and you're gonna find a lot of material about her. So I'm gonna start talking about the book about against interpretation. Okay, so first we have to establish what does she means by interpretation. Okay, she does not mean. Thank you so much. This is like. She does not mean interpretation on the basic sense, like in a way that everything must be. We interpret everything: music, movies, every piece of a piece of art, a book. It's not like that. She reading from the book, which I'm gonna do in a few times. She established interpretation actually as something about what I call the theory of interpretation, and that's quoting her. Of course, I don't mean interpretation in the broadest sense, the sense in which Nietzsche rightly says there are no facts, only interpretations. By interpretation, I mean here a conscious act of the mind which illustrates a certain code, certain rules of interpretation, right? So we're going to have to establish what interpretation is, because it's such broad and such a wide concept, so we can follow how we're going to attach that to gastronomy afterwards. So that's it. It's more about a theory about interpretation. So her objection to interpretation on that level, we established already to discuss a theory of interpretation. It's not the basic one, the theoretical one. Is what harm does it do to our artwork and eventually to our society, right? Ultimately, her view is that the theory of interpretation is always revisionist. Their purpose is always to take the artwork, regardless of whether it's something to see, to hear, or to touch, and in our case, to eat, and rather to take it as it is, to turn into something else. And the reason that Susan believes that that is done is to render the wonder of the contemporary world, and by contemporary here, in this case, I'm gonna mean this book was written in the US in the 60s, right? So to render the wonders of the contemporary world, but for our purposes, storytelling, for me, in this way, couldn't be more actual. She gives us some historical context for it. So she writes that we just aim to turn the world of art into something else, as to justify some contemporary demand. So she says here on table, again, quoting her. History gives us the materials for this answer, the theoretics of interpretation. Interpretation first appears in the culture of the late classical antiquity, when power and credibility of myth have been broken by the realistic view of the world introduced by scientific enlightenment. Once the question that haunts post-mythic consciousness, that of the seemingly religious symbols, have been asked, the ancient texts were, in their pristine form no longer acceptable. Then interpretation is summoned to reconcile the ancient text to the modern demands. Thus, the Stoics, to accord with their view that the gods had to be moral, allegorized away rude features of Zeus and his boisterous clan in Homer's epics. Was Homer really designed by the adultery of Zeus with Leto? They explained was union between power and wisdom. They found a way to make it as moral acceptable to that contemporary world, whenever this was. Of course, you mentioned the Bible. The story of the Exodus from Egypt, the wandering in the desert for 40 years and the entry into the promised land, said Philo, was really an allegory of the individual soul's emancipations, tribulations, and final deliverance. And I think she was very clever here in using the Bible because she knows that the Bible will be around for forever, and we always would have something to compare her book to. So, some things won't go away. I think so, yeah, the Bible is a comparison won't go away. So interpretation can be in the analysis of a painting, a movie, a text, or any other kind of artwork through the lens of theoretical consideration, and involves the transformation of the object in question into something other than it is for the purpose of satisfying what at the time is a contemporary demand. Okay? Are you with me? Is it too complicated? Yeah. But why is this bad? Why is it bad? Why does Susan consider this bad? Susan, in this book, is not actually categorical that this is bad. Okay? She at the time, she actually mentioned that it can be necessary. Like, I can give you the example of the old Soviet Union, North Korea, and all those dictatorship regimes who use artwork and use artists for their political agenda and to brainwash people and to keep people within their circle believing that in their own truth and everything like that. So in that way, and I come from a country, Brazil, that we just have an election that that Bolsonaro used the machine, the fake news. We have all that involved right now, and then it's kind of necessary. We need that top of the pyramid, the intellectual top of the pyramid, to interpret that propaganda and spread to the bottom of the pyramid in a country like Brazil, which is very similar to what Santi was saying about Mexico. Some people never leave Mexico. I made it, I left Brazil, so it's like, and so we need that a tiny elite at the top of the pyramid to interpret that propaganda and spread to the bottom in the right way. So it's not always bad. It's not always bad, okay? But me, Alberto, after so much studying and research, I would stand by what the text maintains. The concerns she expresses and the damage this kind of interpretation can do for the artwork itself and for society in the future. Here's some of examples taken straight from the text. Like she's talking about the castle. It's one of Franz Kafka's famous books, which is in page 8. 6, 7, 8. Okay. The work of Kafka, for example, has been subject to a mass ravishment by no less than 3 armies of interpreters. Those who read Kafka as a social allegory to see case studies of the frustrations and insanity of modern bureaucracy and its ultimate issuance in the totalitarian state. Those who read Kafka as a psychoanalytic allegory see desperate revelations of Kafka's fear of his father, his castration anxieties, his sense of his own impotence, his thraldom to his dreams. And those who read Kafka as a religious allegory explaining that Kay, one of the characters, in the castle is trying to gain access to heaven. The Joseph Kay, which is a character in another book, The Trial, is being judged by the mysterious justice of God. So, And then interpretation based on the highly dubious theory that a work of art is composed of items of content. I'll repeat that. Interpretation based on the highly dubious content theory that a work of art is composed of items of content violate art. It makes art into an article for use for arrangement into a mental scheme of categories. So why in today's world can this be bad? And now I hear that we're not only talking about the US in the 60s, but we're also talking about any advanced capitalist consuming society nowadays. Okay, go back to the book. 7. Yeah. Today is such a time when the project of interpretation is largely reactionary, stifling. In a culture whose already classical dilemma is the hypertrophy of the intellect at the expense of energy and sensual capability, interpretation is the revenge of the intellect upon art. The world, our world, is depleted, impoverished enough. Then I go to page 13 and 14. Look like a pastor reading the Bible, but interpretation takes the sensory experience of the artwork for granted and proceeds from there. This cannot be taken for granted now. Think of the sheer multiplication of works of art available to every one of us, super-added to the conflict tastes and others inside of the urban environment that bombard our senses. Ours is a culture based on excess, on overproduction. The result is a steady loss of sharpness in our sensory experience. All the conditions of modern life, its material plenitude, its sheer crowdedness, conjoin to dull our sensory faculties. And it is in the light of the condition of our senses, our capacities, rather than those of another age, that the task of the critic must be assessed. What is important now is to recover our senses. We must learn to see more, to hear more, to feel more. Our task is not to find the maximum amount of contact in a work of art, much less to squeeze more content out of the work of art that's already there. Our task is to cut back content so that we can see the thing at all. The aim of all commentary on art now should be to make works of art, and by analogy, on our own experience, more rather than less real to us. The function of criticism should be to show how it is what it is, even that it is what it is, rather than show what it means. In a place of a hermeneutics, we need an erotics of art. That's how she closes. So let's put this together. In Susan's think, I think, in my interpretation of her interpretation, in Susan's think, mass production, industry, mass production, and mass consumption have done two things to the world. They elevated the intellect and the production of intellection above the sensibility and the products of sensibility, the products of feeling, the products of emotion. It has produced a society that's characterized by overstimulation, overproduction, and the one I like the least, overconsumption. Combined, these two have served to hurt, dull, blunt, and render less sophistication, less discerning in our sensibilities. We see, hear, smell, listen, and touch in a less powerfully, less distinct, in a less sophisticated fashion. He elevated the intellect of the product of intellectual activity in terms of value system. And value can be money, or value can, anyone has heard about lists, stars, or something similar, I don't know. And thus produced a word that conspires and ultimately destroys our native human sensibility. In such times, Susan says, the worst thing we can do is to engage our art through the intellect, to engage our art through some intellectual construction or process for the sake of yielding epistemic. Epistemic could be something intellectual, easy to digest, let's put it that way. Products for mass, I'll start again. We shouldn't engage in producing art just for the sake of yielding epistemic products for mass consumption and unnecessary consumption. Okay, so this is my view and my interpretation of this book that I've spent 2 years studying, and it is fascinating. I suggest everyone to read. So how does that relate to food and our world and our industry, in my point of view? How do you connect such an intellectual, even prophetical essay with the overflow of storytelling we're having in our industry nowadays? Of course, I'm talking to a lot of journalists here, so it's kind of complicated, but So, before I start, has anyone, please don't need to raise your hands, has anyone felt any similarities? Has anyone felt that there's something that already interacts without me saying anything about it, with the world we live in? Okay, it is important to be clear that the theme, as Andy explained already, was chosen at Oteque because I told him, I have no storytelling to tell you. I'm sorry, Andy. The only thing I can give you is food and drink to get you as drunk as possible, so you perhaps think you liked the meal. And but prior to opening Oteque, I spent 2 years talking to colleagues and taking a step back and observing the market from a simple customer point of view. And it was very clear that effort, the necessity of intellectual production, that many times ended in bad menus, bad stories, and bad food, always tried to conduct whoever was eating and depriving the person to have its own feelings work, which can sound weird in a time where having a main and deep narrative are the basic premises. We're made to believe that having a main and deep narrative is the basic premise of business success, even more than the product itself in a lot of cases. And before I go forward, one comment. What I think and what I have become to think studying Susan's work, in no way this means disrespect or disdain for the work of colleagues that use the force of storytelling more than I do for their work. I have deep respect for all the chefs, and as I said, sometimes it's necessary. I was talking to Santiago yesterday, and then we were talking about this, and he said, "Oh, Alberto, I'm opening a place in London, close to his, and he said there are no Mexican places in London. He said that sometimes I need a little bit of storytelling, but I think I was thinking that through the night. I think you need sometimes more explanation than storytelling for the people. What's this ingredient? Why we do this and why we do that?" So Susan's basic disruptive view is that at some point we lost our hand a little bit and subverted the space storytelling occupies within our industry, being us chefs, writers, foodies, restaurateurs, or whoever. This is no insult against no one, just some contradictory, perhaps polemic point of view that I have, so we can all go home, and hopefully I'm giving you some food for thought in this analysis, and it's always healthy to hear different points of view and give us something different to think about a little. I'm not here to try to change anyone's concept of what they do or what I do is better or worse. That's not the idea at all. I really do not know of other field of work that uses all 5 senses 100% of time as cooking does. Not only high-end fine dining restaurant stuff to storytelling, but also in a taco truck or in a hot dog stand. The guy's using these 5 senses all the time. But surely on the dining rooms and the special occasions that we put ourselves in a situation where we can focus and concentrate our 5 senses, both as chefs and my team, and the eaters and the journalists or whoever is sitting at the tables, to satisfy our pleasures that go beyond just our need to feed ourselves and to kill our hunger. And that's the key moment where the most potent part of the machine called human body must take over. We must just turn to our brain and our heart and say, please delight me, darling. Take care and conduct this experience for me. This is what I try to do. That's why I ask you to bring Catherine with you. And of course, the logic of the market, capitalism, competition. We all have bills to pay. Rent in London is a bitch. I'm finding out now. And of course, has invaded this industry, and alongside it, some great restaurants critics also have evolved to the point where some texts are not only critics of about a plate of food, but really real nuggets of. I'm pretty sure everyone has read a text about Andrea, written by Andrea. Some food critics have become real nuggets of gastronomic literature value. And I want to make another mention to Gail Green, who left us this week at the young, tender age of 88 years young. It's not against storytelling that I'm proposing this discussion, but to the excess that some chefs and restaurants have attached themselves to it. Sometimes the restaurant is not even open, and we already have PRs company blasting our ears with their bloody storytelling, how they're gonna save the world, how they're gonna save all the garbage in the world, and how they're gonna, do everything. And the necessity that customer journalists, foodies have developed to consume storytelling alongside of a plate of food. The other day I was having a conversation about this, and someone said, oh, but I like to have storytelling. Of course, we fucking brainwashed you and put that into your mind that you need that, right? So make no mistake of how serious I am, and I take my vocation as a chef, and how much I respect the art of cooking and feed those and all those who do it. But I refuse to accept that to have a gastronomic proposition nowadays, beyond what you put on the plate, pour in the glass, and how you serve and host it, you need to create a fable around it to be successful. I just refuse to think like that. Before someone thinks I'm insensitive, I'd like to share a personal story. I'm not going to go deep. I'm often asked about my career path. I'm not going to go deep into that because I had a long night last night, so I had to go into that. But I can tell that I read physics at university. So when I was 20 years old, I had never fried an egg in my life. But even starting so late, the passion why gastronomy started burning inside me was exactly because I had found a form to express myself in a creative way. I would not have a boring life, and I use all my senses all the times besides other external factors. I'll learn about history, about other cultures. I'll learn about, I'll travel. I'll learn new flavors. And I found out that the kitchen is actually an infinite source of knowledge and ways to express oneself. So coming back to Brazil after 5 years without seeing my family, and this is early 2000s. There's no Instagram, no WhatsApp, no FaceTime, nothing like that. I started observing my mom. I remember the first meal my mom did to me was a chicken stew that I loved. I started observing my mom cooking my favorite dish, a chicken stew with vegetables, and I started feeling more emotional from the point of view of a connection of food. Until then, I came from physics. I got into the kitchen because of that. I don't know the story a little bit. And so the emotional part of the connection with food in my life came after I was already a professional chef and with a clear and successful path kind of aligned in front of me. And but what about my mom? I'm sure that day she was preparing my favorite dish. After 5 years, not seeing her son away from home, I'm pretty sure she didn't want to tell any story. There's no storytelling behind it. What she really wanted was just to feed me, take care of me, show affection towards me, to kill that urge, and to feed her son that was away from home for so long. And I consider the act of cooking and eating by themselves have to really focus on the experience of both of the parts that are having, the chef and themselves in expressing themselves, and the eaters by letting them brain and their hearts take charge by themselves much more than our interference to give clues or data for interpretation with our storytelling even before they start their meals. To interpret something is a human instinct. There's no way around it. Our brains are unstoppable machines to interpret it, to associate meanings, machines to construct sense for every sensation we feel. So why don't we just leave this experience to our brains, hearts, and body and let the magic happen? They're more than capable of doing so, I can guarantee you that. My cuisine is literally and metaphorically 100% open. My kitchen is some people here have been there. To say that I have a open kitchen is an understatement. I have a direct contact with the customers all the time, and that contributed for me to construct Oteque, the experience I wished for the eaters to have for when they make the from the moment they make the reservation, the expectation for the lack of information. Maybe that's my storytelling. I don't give them information and they don't know. And I try to create the expectation in them. And the pace, the cohesion, the construction of flavor in our menu and pairings, it's like an opera. The climax, the tension built alongside the evening with a happy ending. Most of operas don't have a happy ending. But I hope, at the restaurant, people go away happy. And I think I succeeded. Awards, clients, critics, full house, be able to thrive after the pandemic. These things all show that. That's the story. Let people feel and let their bodies take control. And feel the ups and downs. What a letter makes a difference. If feel a double L, it's like, and feel the ups and downs of emotions that will happen throughout the evening. That's my story. That's the story. I don't think much else is needed. Thank you.